because I was thinking rather than liberté, fraternité, and equality, sustainability, legitimacy, and stability being the three themes that we need in terms of the direction of the electricity system. And that, I think, implies taking the opportunity that the current demand situation, supply situation provides us to have a conversation about how to achieve those things and how to achieve some degree of consensus in terms of a direction forward. Because we keep having a succession, I think the reason there's so much instability is we've had a succession of consensuses which have been a mile deep and an inch wide. And we have different constituencies temporarily seizing control of the system until the next policy window comes along and somebody else grabs the wheel. And that's not helping us in the long term. I agree that there are efficiencies there, although that requires several intellectual steps that Adam and Marion are hinting at. But at the moment, we're still at the stage, well, if we've got surplus supply and falling demand, we don't need to do conservation. And that's part of the reason why it's been so marginalized within the Green Energy Act framework. So we need to be building the more sophisticated arguments around that in terms of long-term and productivity. And that also leads to the question of how do you deal with the low-income situation, because as we know, there's a whole range of barriers that low-income households have in terms of access to information, access to capital, even control over the capital assets if you're a tenant, all of those kinds of things. But none of these things are insurmountable in terms of program design. We have lots of precedents, some of them in Ontario and lots in other jurisdictions. Going back to earlier work I did even in how you design tests like the total resource cost test for doing conservation. Places like BC actually give you an adder for targeting programs at low-income communities. So that's an issue. It's a very important one, but it's not an insurmountable one. The challenge is that those constituencies tend to be somewhat less able to articulate their interests in that conversation than perhaps Adam's clients, for example. There is a resource imbalance in that discussion. And the final thought is that I always did have to explain to my colleagues at the Pembina Institute that the concept of energy policy did not exist in Ontario. There is only electricity policy. And indeed, the Mowat Centre at U of T, I noticed, just wrote a paper that basically said that for 80% of the energy supply, we have absolutely no conception whatsoever in terms of security, supply, any of that. Although I think we're about to be pushed, not that I want to deflect the panel too much, but of course, the way the oil sands conversations are unfolding, we may be deflected from that conversation as all these discussions about reversing pipelines start to become part of the picture. But I'll leave it at that.